The plane was buzzing with the usual hum of engines and quiet chatter when she boarded. At first glance, she seemed like just another passenger, calm, composed, and carrying a designer handbag that matched her sharp demeanor. But the moment her eyes locked on the man in seat 12B, everything changed. He was a detective, though nothing about him screamed law enforcement. No badge, no uniform, just a man lost in a paperback novel. She didn't hesitate. With laser focus, she maneuvered through the aisle, her every step calculated. Was she just choosing a seat, or was something much darker in play? Her actions were subtle but deliberate, sparking questions no one else seemed to notice. Who was she? Why was she targeting him? As turbulence rocked the plane, their paths collided in a way no one could have predicted. And what happened next left everyone stunned. The woman finally slid into the seat next to him, her movements smooth, almost too perfect, like she practiced this moment. The detective, still immersed in his book, barely noticed her at first. But she wasn't here to read or relax. Her eyes darted to his hands, his jacket, the faint outline of a badge tucked into an inside pocket. She knew exactly who he was. A flight attendant passed by, breaking the silence, and the woman used the distraction to start a casual conversation. "Long flight ahead, huh?" she said, her voice light but her tone deliberate. The detective looked up, polite but distant, offering only a nod before returning to his book. But she didn't stop there. She leaned in slightly, just enough to make him glance at her again. Who was this woman? A friend? An enemy? Or something far more complicated? The air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken intentions. The detective shifted in his seat, finally setting his book down. Something about her persistence felt off. Her questions were harmless on the surface, traveling for work. First time on this route, but they came with a strange intensity. He gave vague answers, his instincts quietly kicking in. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a smile with a purpose. As the flight continued, he started noticing little things. Her glance toward his phone when a message popped up, the wave her hand hovered near her bag as if guarding something important. Was it paranoia? Or was she playing a game he couldn't quite see yet? Meanwhile, another subplot was unfolding. A passenger across the aisle was watching them, their face unreadable, as if they were tuned into a silent drama. The detective noticed them too. Was it just a coincidence? Or was he walking into something far more tangled than he'd expected? The detective's instincts were screaming now. Her questions had become sharper, more specific, too specific for someone making casual small talk. "You must travel a lot for your job," she said, her eyes briefly flicking to his jacket again. "Ever deal with anything dangerous?" He forced a smile. "Not really," he lied, trying to read her while keeping his guard up. The tension between them was palpable, a quiet storm brewing at 30,000 feet. Meanwhile, the passenger across the aisle hadn't stopped watching. The detective could feel their gaze, almost as much as he could feel the woman's calculated proximity. Then it happened. The plane jolted, a patch of turbulence throwing the cabin into brief chaos. In that split second, the woman's bag fell open, spilling its contents onto the floor. Among the scattered items was something that shouldn't have been there, something that made the detective's pulse race. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. The detective's eyes locked onto the object now lying on the floor, a small, sleek device with blinking lights, something that definitely didn't belong in a handbag. His stomach tightened. He reached down instinctively, but so did she, snatching it up with a speed that confirmed his suspicions. Her expression faltered for just a moment before she plastered on a nervous smile. "Just a charger," she said, tucking it back into her bag. but her tone betrayed her calm facade. Could press further, a commotion erupted a few rows back. A passenger was loudly arguing with a flight attendant, demanding to switch seats. The detective turned his head, distracted for just a moment, but long enough for her to pull out her phone. When he looked back, she was typing furiously, her demeanor shifting. Was she signaling someone? Communicating with whoever might be involved? Across the aisle, the other passenger stood up, moving closer. The detective realized with a jolt that this wasn't just a coincidence. There were more players in this game than he'd anticipated. And he was running out of time to figure out who was pulling the strings. The detective didn't wait any longer. He leaned in, his voice low but firm. "What's really going on here?" he asked, his eyes locked on hers. For the first time, she hesitated, her confident demeanor cracking under the weight of his suspicion. Before she could answer, the other passenger who had been watching made their move, stepping into the aisle. "Detective, I think you dropped this," they said, holding out a folded slip of paper. The detective's heart pounded as he unfolded it. Scrawled on the note were 4 chilling words. Asterisk, she's not the 3'd asterisk. Before he could react, the plane jolted again, but this time it wasn't turbulence. The woman next to him gasped as the man across the aisle suddenly lunged, reaching for her bag. The detective sprang into action, grabbing the man's arm. A struggle ensued, passengers shouting in alarm. In the chaos, the woman pulled the small device back out, her hands trembling as she handed it to the detective. "It's a tracker," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I was following asterisk him. Asterisk, he's dangerous." The detective glanced at the man, whose expression had turned cold, calculated. Suddenly, everything clicked. The woman wasn't the one targeting him. She'd been trying to warn him all along. But before he could cuff the man, the stranger pulled something from his pocket. A flight attendant's ID. The final twist left the detective reeling. The real threat had been moving freely this whole time, hiding in plain sight. The detective acted fast, signaling the real flight attendants for backup. The imposter tried to blend back into the chaos, but the woman wasn't letting him slip away. "He's been following me for weeks," she said urgently, her voice steadier now. Together, she and the detective cornered the man as a crew member, called for security to meet the plane upon landing. When the plane finally touched down, airport authorities were waiting. The imposter was taken into custody, his stolen ID and suspicious items confiscated. As the passengers disembarked, the woman turned to the detective, her gratitude evident. "I knew I couldn't face him alone. Thank you for believing me, eventually." The detective chuckled, shaking his head. "Guess we make a good team." As he walked away, he couldn't shake the thought. Sometimes the people you suspect the most turn out to be the ones you need to trust.